praise for his veteran teammate, calling CP3, quote, the greatest leader to play this game. Strong words. Shannon, where would you rank Chris Paul as a leader all time here in the NBA?
I'm not going to be a prisoner of the moment like Devin Booker. And I understand, Skip, it's his first NBA Finals. I think Devin Booker was 8 years old when Chris Paul got drafted and ended up going to the New Orleans Hornets. And I understand having a guy of Chris caliber and it's unlocked Devin Booker's full when you played doesn't mean it didn't happen. There are other guys that have led teams to championship. And I skip, this is a perfect storm. This is a perfect storm. You got a really young team with no playoff. Aiden's never been to the playoffs. Book had never been to the playoffs. Bridges, most of these guys, only Jay Crowder has finals experience. So you got the old head and Chris Paul.
Yep.
Been to the playoffs, been there, seen it all, never been to the finals. This young team, never been to the playoffs, let alone been to the finals, let alone the playoffs. And you get him, he's a calming effect. He's a coach on the floor. But I cannot go that far because I've seen what LeBron has done with less talented teams and make it to the finals. I've seen what Magic Johnson, I'm old enough to remember when Magic Johnson played. I don't remember Bill Russell, Skip. He was long gone before, basically, I was 1 or 2 years old when he retired. But you win 11 championships in 13 years, and you win 2 of them as a player coach, you're a hell of a leader. So I think Chris Paul is a phenomenal leader. I think the thing is also, Skip, that we look at leaders, normally they're guards. I think that's the big thing, that when we look at Mr. Russell, centers are not usually, because they need somebody to get them the ball. It's normally the guy that has the ball that gets the ball to other guys. So where are we going to rank Jordan now? I thought Jordan was a great leader.
He was.
And then now all of a sudden we just disregard Jordan because what we see for CP3? CP3 is phenomenal. I'm not trying to diminish the man. Willing to sit here and say, Skip, he's the greatest leader now.
I appreciate all of that perspective. I also appreciate what Devin said, because in his eyes and mind and in his life right now, Chris is the greatest leader ever, because this team is firmly positioned to go win a ring here in the next week or so.
Correct.
So I get all that. I'll go this far. The Chris Paul I have seen last year, a year ago in Oklahoma City, and then this season in Phoenix, is becoming, as he mellows, one of the greatest leaders ever.
Yes.
I need to see this get finished off. But if it does get finished off, it's going to shoot him way up my ranks in leadership.
Okay.
And again, I'm going to rank Magic at the very top for the reason you said. He did have the ball in his hands, and he was a true point. And he was the true leader of the Showtime Lakers. And they had as fierce a competition as you could ever find in Larry Bird's Celtics. And they went back and forth, but Magic had the upper hand in that in the end. So I'm going to rank him first. But a 1A for me is Michael Jordan. You and I disagree on the leadership style because it was abusive. But it worked. But he was the leader, obviously, of teams that went 6-0 in the finals. You can give Phil some credit for that, but Michael was the voice in that locker room that everybody feared. And then, to your point, Bill Russell, I don't even know how to rank him, but he's right in that, he's right in the mix, because he was the first ever player coach. So he actually played and coached for a couple of years as the head coach. Okay, well, that works as leader.
That should count for something.
Okay, don't sleep on Tim Duncan, because he was the leader of what I thought was a Spurs dynasty. And he didn't say much publicly, but privately, when he spoke, they listened. And that team followed him more than it followed Pop or obviously Manu or Tim or I mean Tony, but it was Tim Duncan. Okay, so here's the point about Chris Paul. Let's track his career quickly. So he gets drafted by a mediocre Pelicans team in New Orleans, and he's there for 6 years, which is a pretty good chunk of time.
Correct.
And they make the playoffs 3 times. In 1 year, they did beat the Mavs in 5 in the first 2008, and then they took my Spurs all the way to Game 7. They were up 3-2 in that series, and it went right to the last drop because Chris Paul was a force, but he was more of a scoring force at that point than even an assisting force. He was a little 6-foot bulldog of a, not even, he was a pit bull of a scorer. So then we have remember the vetoed trade that takes place on December 8th, 2011. 2011, he is gone to the Lakers. And what happens? Because the Pelicans were then owned and operated by the league, David Stern, the commissioner, said, no, I will not have that. So 3 days later, he goes to the other LA team, the team in the basement, the Clippers. And what happened with the Clippers? Not much. Except that Chris, the biggest story, the subplot that became the plot, was that he was constantly feuding with Blake Griffin. They just didn't get along, and those were 2 big superstar egos, and they clashed like crazy because Chris is hot-blooded. Chris is quick-tempered. Chris has been, over his career, a cheap shot artist where he just loses his mind. It's not calculated. I just think it's over the edge where he is competing so hard that because he's only 6 feet tall, he says, I got to get you, so I'll get you below the belt. And I can't discount his reputation as a cheap shot artist because through all this time with the Clippers, they even at one point got up 3-1 on Houston. And they lost 3 straight games. And Chris's numbers in those games were pretty good, but can you say greatest leader when you blow a lead like that?
One time, Skip. You mentioned Magic. You mentioned Jordan. You mentioned Duncan. You mentioned Bill Russell. Stop playing. You know who the leader is.
Okay, I'll put him in there. LeBron.
Yeah, they put him in there. You put him at the top of the list.
I don't put him at the top of the list. No, he's
don't do that. Don't do that, Skip. Don't do that.
I'll give him about 5th on my list.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
No, I'm not. But he does belong up in there, and that's a fair point on your part. So I give you that. But so what happens to Chris Paul? It gets so bad with the Clippers, they finally say, we can't do this anymore. And he winds up in Houston with James Harden, and it was nothing but feuding, back and forth between those two, clashing. This town ain't big enough for the both of them, And it got so bad that after 2 years, and they did have, obviously, a 3-2 lead on Golden State when Chris pulled his hamstring because he was perpetually getting hurt in the playoffs in big moments. Then what happens? The Rockets said, we got to get rid of him. And so they said, we're going to trade for Russell Westbrook, but we're going to have to give up 4 first-round picks to do this because part of the bounty was to get rid of Chris and his salary to Oklahoma City. And silly me, when he got shipped to my hometown of Oklahoma City, what did I think? That he was being put out to pasture.
It's kind of like, Skip, you tried to sell the house, but you got to throw the furniture in to make sure the house
to get the deal done. Am I right? And so I pitied Chris Paul because I thought, God, this team is in a straight-on rebuild right now where you're going to be stuck with a lot of young players and you're just going to have to play for your check, and that's about it. And you're just going to kind of slowly fade into the sunset. And what did they do that first year? There's Shea Gilgeous there, and there's Lou Dort.
They made it. They made it to the playoffs, and
they went 44-28. They tied for 4th in the Western Conference, but they ended up in the 5 seed, but on the tiebreaker. But still, 44-28. That might have been Chris Paul's greatest achievement, right?
It might. Well, this will be his greatest achievement. That'll be his second greatest.
But I'm saying that set the stage for this. And then it was still a fairly quiet maneuver when he winds up in Phoenix. It's not like we did our whole show on Chris Paul goes to the Suns. Well, it was beautiful because it was right on time because Devin Booker was ready to become a star. DeAndre Ayton was almost ready to become a star.
Skip, I had him. I said it'd be a 4 or 5 seed. I did not see it. Nobody saw this coming.
So we're talking about greatest leader. Well, somehow he's mellowed out. And all the stories last night after the game was about, we clashed all year. You know, we had to find ourselves. And Chris Paul clashed with Devin Booker, and Chris Paul was all over DeAndre Ayton. But as Monty Williams said, we had a meeting of the minds where Chris Paul made peace with everybody. And you know how it happens. You've been around for 16 years, and you finally say, I guess I got to kind of just chill a little bit, right?
Yes.
I got to swallow some of my pride in the way I do it, because maybe my way isn't the only way to do it. And all of a sudden, great things started happening.
Skip, if you go someplace and everywhere you go there's a stench, you're it.
Yep.
Think about that, CP3. Everywhere you go, there's a disagreement. There's an argument somewhere.
Yep.
And the only common denominator is you. So it might be you. But, Skip, this is the perfect storm. Think about it. Book, really young.
Perfect.
Aiden, really young.
You couldn't be
Mikal Bridges, really young.
You're right on time. It's perfect.
It's perfect.
And listen, to your point of last week, your backup, he's pretty good.
Yes.
So when you need a little rest, they don't drop off at all.
Right.
In fact, they sort of speed up.
Right.
The RPM goes up with campaign.
I think that the biggest thing for Chris, that what Chris needed to understand, your leadership style can't be one way for everybody.
Yeah.
You have to understand, some guys need you to ride them a little bit. Some guys need you to put your arm around them and say, hey, bro, hey, I know you better than that.
Yeah.
I know you can make that play. I'm counting on you to make that play. Some guys you be joke, hey, bro, my wife could have hit that shot. So you just got to find a style. But to come in there like, everybody, it's not going to work. So people will rebuff you.
Okay.
And I think he has a great relationship with Monty Williams that goes back a decade.
Does.
He's like, CP, you have to understand, check the temperature of the room.
Yep.
That and go accordingly from there.
I would agree. And I heard a story last night from Devin Booker. He said they had some team bonding parties early on. And he would tell his friends after